Are you hunting for ghosts by chance? So I've never experienced anything myself. Other tour guides have. Now I do have to say, during the dead of winter, like November, December, especially before the HVAC system was installed and it was freezing cold, it gets super dark in this hallway. It's a bit brighter now that we've changed the wallpaper, but usually our station waiting for tours to arrive is right there. It's super dark. One of our staff members, two of our staff members actually, they were being shown around for training. They thought no one else was in the house, and they heard some noise, and they're like, "Oh my God, the guys are being haunted!" And it was just the archivist checking up on them. But in terms of actual ghost stories, there's a story that around here that there's something, because there's stories of this moving around without there being truck or heavy traffic around. We've had stories of cold spots. There's also a story, I don't know the details, but apparently at one point they were doing a field trip, and what was it? Was it the little boy at the Irving bed?
I haven't heard that story for a very long time.
I know, Tracy like knows the story.
Yeah, Tracy
well.
knows the story.
We have some tour guides who have been here since like the late 50s, so they know all those stories. But I believe a child tried to go and wanted to go and like lay in the bed, and they were told, no, you can't do that. And he's like, but there's a man in the bed, I saw him earlier. So possibly that it was Captain Irving in the bed, and it is possible he died in that bed, and that is sort of the rumor.
So during Halloween, I was doing the cemetery tour, and my coworker was doing the cemetery tour as well. And we both left, and then I called him, and I was like, "Hey, I don't think I locked the front door," which is like right there. So he went back in. He turned on all the lights so he could go check. He's walking out, and all the lights shut off.
I was gonna ask.
Welcome. So Captain William Irving, he's the patriarch of the family. He was born first in Scotland in 1816, went to sea as a cabin boy when he was 15 years old. By 19, he was a first mate, and 10 years later, he was captain of his own vessel, so he made his living on the sea. But when the gold rush started happening, first in California, he realized I can make a lot more money by, instead of searching for gold, transporting miners and goods up and down the river system. So it was there where he met his future wife, Miss Dixon, or Elizabeth Irving, and they got married, had 5 children. When the Fraser River Gold Rush started here, British Columbia didn't exist. There wasn't even a British colony here on the mainland. It was just on Vancouver Island in Victoria. So they moved there. Slowly, the British government wanting to establish this as a British colony. You know, in case the Americans tried to invade, they chose New Westminster as starting the mainland colony, because they were thinking if they got invaded, the river on this side, it has a steep hill, so strategically it was just far better than on the other side, Surrey, or where they originally wanted to start the colony, present-day Port Moody. So they did go establish the colony more so. Now, with the gold rush, Captain Irving, although his family was then settled in Victoria, he was mostly around here. He wanted to be closer to his family. So that's why in 1865, this house was built. He spent $10,000 building the house. So back then, that was a year's salary for a very rich man. So quite significant. But in 1872, tragedy struck because Captain Irving died of double pneumonia, so it was in both of his lungs. Mrs. Irving stayed here for another 13 years to finish raising the children. But then, once all the children were grown up and married and off on their own, at that time, she wanted to return back to Portland, Oregon, where most of her family was. She always considered that home. But at that point, what would happen to the house? Well, technically it should have gone to John as the only son, but John Irving, his family was living in Victoria, he took over the family steering wheeler business. He didn't really need a big house in New West, but the eldest child, Mary, definitely did. She married Thomas Briggs, and they had 9 children. So there was an agreement there that, you know what, she's gonna get the house. So John held an auction where his sister was the only person there, and she conveniently bought it at auction for the exact amount she inherited upon her father's death, which was $2,000. Mary Briggs, she did do a lot of revitalizing for the house, a lot of redecorating throughout. So although this stove and oven, it is original to the house, but it's a Briggs addition. So this is from 1915 rather than 1965, but still a family piece. They have moved it around a bit. So the youngest Briggs daughters, Manuela and Naomi, they stayed in the house until 1950. By that point, they were getting on in years, the family fortune had really dwindled, and so they sold the house to the city of New Westminster with the agreement that it would become a museum. Now this room, the kitchen, this is where children and servants had their meals. They were not allowed into the dining room until you were old enough to know your manners, so that's adults only. And Mary Briggs, she held many fundraisers in this room for her favorite local charity groups. And in one of the society papers, it describes streamers twirling down from the chandelier to each place that where there was a little gift. So it could get really elaborate. Originally there were only 3 windows here, but then Mary said, you know what, that's kind of weird, let's add this window here. It adds more light to the room, it's symmetrical, which I like. But just to give you an idea of how much Westminster has built up, Captain Irving chose this location at the top of the hill so that he could look down and see where he made his fortune. And there's stories of the Briggs and before them, the Irvings, waving at John and William working on the river from here. This is where business meetings would be held to show that you're extra manly. We have some family artifacts of the 2 buffalo hide chairs. That bizarre device there that looks like an elephant trunk, that's an early photocopier. So what you do is you quickly write your letter in ink, you put a piece of paper on it, and you squish it with that. Now you'd have a copy, it would be backwards so you'd have to read it in a mirror, but you can say, I definitely sent you, I wrote this letter to you on this day. So that was the purpose of it. And we have the library here, which have a number of family artifacts. The cedar baskets that I want to point out, these are this is sort of the one major feminine element of the house, of this room, I should say, because cedar baskets were made by Indigenous women locally here. Mary Briggs loved these baskets. She collected them, she used them for her daughter's weddings, she would use them for fresh cut flowers and holding the wedding gifts. And Indigenous people knew, hey, we can get a really good deal if we barter our baskets to her directly, because they would go door to door looking to barter them for money or food or clothing, whatever they can get. They would do that along the riverbanks. But Mary became known as, if you have a good piece, you go to her and she'll give you a decent price. She got this professional photograph taken. The original's in the archives.
Wow.
But just imagine that if you were poor, you might not have a picture of your children, but she has a picture
Of all these
of all of her baskets. Are you hunting for ghosts by chance? Okay.
This tells me if there's a fluctuation.
Mm.
It seems like lately, every time we bring up the wife, they start to move.
Mm. Interesting. Captain Irving did die likely in this house, and I'll tell you about some theories about where, and I'll go over a bit of that in some of the other rooms.
Right.
So it'll be interesting to see what you see there. So this is a small parlor, and this wallpaper is original from those 1887 restorations. We actually did some major cleanup in 2018. I'll show you a patch of what it looked like before, but we had volunteers on scaffolding. And the first step to remove the soot was those little white stapler erasers by hand, erasing every little thing just to get that coal and smoke dust out of the rooms. Oh, it was incredible, and it's so much brighter now. So that's Captain William Irving, the head of the household. So born in and on Scotland in 1816. We have his wedding portrait right there to the future Mrs. Irving, or Elizabeth Dixon, right there. And they had their 5 children. You can see John in between them with the boutonniere. John Irving did take over the family business when his father passed away in 1872. So he's also a Captain Irving. And then they had 4 daughters. Mary, the eldest, that's her wedding portrait there. Susan, Elizabeth or Lizzie, and Nellie, the youngest. You can see them as adults with their mother there. And Mary, that's her wedding portrait, and her husband Thomas Briggs, that's his wedding portrait. And you can see them with their 9 children right there.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so across this way, this is this large parlor. Here, I've already seen it, so I'm gonna let you guys get the lovely view. So you can think of this as the living room, or the family room today. At the time it was called the large parlor. This is where you have your afternoon tea, you're gonna spend time with your family, reading passages from the Bible as good Presbyterians. You have the Sunday doll, reportedly, if you were good all week and only on Sunday were you allowed to play with the Sunday doll. But you wanted to die a good death, which meant you're surrounded by loved ones and family members, so your funeral would be held in a parlor. But there are a bunch of lovely touches throughout this house that Captain Irving specifically wanted. So you'll notice the gold rope around, that's to represent a ship's line or a ship's rope, just to show his, where he made his money on the river. I find it quite romantic. This is called a rosette. Sorry, that's okay. So this is original, but there was some damage that had to be replaced when we were updating the electrical, and we've updated the paint job to reflect what it originally would have looked like. But you have the thistle to represent Captain Irving's Scottish heritage, and then you also have the rose there to represent where he met his wife, Elizabeth Dixon, or Mrs. Irving, in Portland, Oregon, the city of roses. Then we have the grand staircase when you're done. So children and servants were not allowed to use the grand staircase. This was meant to make a statement, and so they would use the servant staircase, which we'll see later on. So 23 steps to show off these 12-foot high ceilings. And this is where you're putting your money in things like the mahogany banister here. So this was carved in Scotland and shipped over in pieces before being reinstalled. So you can see the cork there.
Oh yeah.
Just these very long panels. So these are original. Here, I'll get out of the way so that you get a better view. And then we have the nursery. That's where children would be from the time they're born until around 5. Once the Briggs children were older, it was converted to a bedroom. But the Briggs did have a live-in nanny who would have stayed here in a cot. And you'll notice that the crib is extra wide, so that if you have family members visiting for Christmas or Thanksgiving, just throw your baby next to mine, it'll be fine. 1886, I believe it was around 4 a.m. is the estimate on December 1st, could have been November 30th, depending on the time. Now Beryl, one of the older Briggs children, her bedroom was just right in there, we'll see it later on. She woke up, was getting a glass of water that would have been down the hall, and peeking down the staircase, she saw lights, and then she saw 2 men's faces that she did not recognize. She realized they were being robbed. So she went to wake up the men of the household, her father, Thomas Briggs, her brothers, and of course, you know how children are. They're out of bed. They're leaning over the banister to see what's going on. They're super excited. Thomas Briggs starts descending down the staircase. when bam, shot was fired. No one was hurt, but they did get away. Clothing was very expensive because it was often made to tailor. If you've ever tried to buy 100% cotton or wool or linen, it's really expensive. And it's winter, right? So that umbrella stand there, that's an original family piece. That would have held really heavy, warm, luxury coats. They even tried, in their mad dash to escape, they left behind a cloth bag filled with undergarments that were dried by the fire.
Oh my.
So they still got away. There was a stakeout. So on December 3rd, Constable 𝕿𝖍𝖊 and Constable Miller had found an empty abandoned house that had some of the clothing still there. And so they waited, watched for the suspects to return. And sure enough, a man came in. But before the man entered the house, Constable 𝕿𝖍𝖊, as the newspaper reports, evidently lost his head because he tried to arrest the man before he'd entered the house, so he was spotted, and the suspect started firing shots. Apparently one of them came so close to Constable 𝕿𝖍𝖊's head that he got powder burns on his ear.
Wow.
Fortunately, he wasn't hurt, no one was hurt, but no one was caught either. So this is known as John's room. Being the only boy, Lucky Duck got his own bedroom, but for the Briggs, where there's 9 children, there's more than one boy. So that's where you have to go and add some beds. There's some evidence that maybe the Briggs made this the master bedroom so that they could shove as many kids as possible into the actual master bedroom. And then for the girls' room, it's right here. 4 girls had to cure the beds. Would have been quite happy once your sister got married or went off to school. Now we do have a number of original family artifacts here. We did have a lovely tartan dress made by Mary. The fabric was a family tartan sent to her by her aunts, but it was starting to get damaged from the display, so it's you can still see it. You just have to book an appointment with our curator at the Animal Center. So it's taken care of. It's temperature and humidity controlled.
No.
But we still have Nellie's wedding dress. So she's the youngest Irving daughter. But you can see where she's converted this dress either for another occasion or for a different bride. We have a number of family artifacts in here as well. So we have those beautiful blue chairs. We have the matching chest of drawers there, and the dresser here. And of course, Captain Irving's bed. Now it's possible that this was where Captain Irving passed away. It's also possible they would have moved him downstairs, and I hope not moved the bed because that would have been really heavy, but you never know. Now, you'll notice again that the beds are really short. That's not because people were that significantly shorter. It was because they thought it was healthy for you to sit up in bed. And if you think about all the lung problems, and when you're in the hospital with lung problems, they sit you up in bed. Makes sense. And if you're the head of the household, this is a statement piece. You have this tall headboard, there's a lion on it. And here's another one of the blue pots. That's also where you would have put your hair to save the hair wreath. So just imagine what's the pink one. And again, so sorry for spoiling your Christmas gift surprise.
Hear that?
For this side of the furniture, if you lift up this cushion, there's a hidden drawer that pops up that's just here. You can see where the grooves are. That pops up so that you could hide jewelry in it.
Oh, that is cool.
I thought you were going to say it was
Hey, maybe. If they were real, you know, coming from the States, like when people see Cuban cigars up here, they're like, oh man, like, it's funny. So this is made to look like servants' quarters because the seamstress did stay here for a little bit. But if you remember, this was Beryl's bedroom. She was the one who discovered that they were being robbed. So, you know, they're playing musical rooms a bit. They did have 3 servants. All of whom were Chinese. They had a Chinese cook. But the servants likely didn't actually live here. They would have either lived elsewhere on the property, like a compound, but more likely they came from Chinatown, which was where Wedding Street Row is now. but there was a thriving Chinese community. There's actually 2 Chinatowns, but it was completely destroyed during the Great Fire of Westminster in 1898. And that fire came to within a block of this house. If you go down there where the church is, there's a little square with roses and a plaque for where the fire ended. Closets were built in later and they were tiny. My closet growing up, once I immigrated, is narrower than my shoulders.
Oh wow.
So my mom sees this and she just starts drooling about just storage possibilities. Now they didn't have running water until 1906. So what you would do if you had to go to the bathroom is outhouse or chamber pots for midnight emergencies. And you mentioned that you had a 4-year-old son, right?
Yeah.
So because he's old enough to walk, his first job of the day would be to dump out the chamber pots. So
What is this device right here?
that's I'm not wearing gloves, but this is a sewing table.
Oh,
So
okay.
this just protects the sewing machine. So this lifts up and then that's the trundle
Oh wow.
to pump it. Yeah.
So they used it back then, I'm sure.
I
Or
don't,
is
I
this-
don't think this is a family piece, but
Oh,
it's
okay,
of the
okay.
time period and it's from New Westminster.
Neat.
This would have been, this looks later Victorian to me, just based on the age. Possibly Edwardian, but our curator would have the exact
Yeah.
dates. I can't memorize everything, but I try.
No, you're doing great.
But yeah, so if you lift that up, you would see the sewing machine. Other models, like if you go to antique stores or if you have family members with sewing tables, like my mom has an antique sewing table that's been in the family for ages, but it's like a flip top, so it's flat, but then the sewing machine's bolted on the bottom, and then you flip it up when you want to sew something. So, but I want to point out that wire right there. So this is where the original phone line would have been. They had one of the earliest phones in New Westminster.
Whoa.
There's unconfirmed, but there's sort of a tour guide joke / legend that their number was like 1 or 2, like something very simple like that. So this is a teaching artifact of place. So if you want to take a look, you can.
Oh wow.
Yeah.